Hey, is this thing on? Hello? Hit it again. I think it's on now. Welcome to Hiker Trash Radio, where each week, Doc will drag some colorful characters out of the woods to talk trail and Type 2 fun. If you're aspiring hiker trash, or if you're just looking to understand the hiker trash in your life, look no further. So lace up those boots, gnaw on some jerky, and settle into your 20-mile pace as we fire up the podcast from somewhere deep in the backcountry. It's time to embrace the suck.
Welcome back to another week on the trail. Dirtbags, hiker trash, and of course, those good-smelling day hikers. I'm Doc, and this is Hiker Trash Radio. Hey, if you like what we're doing here, help us out. Take just a minute, leave us a review on Apple Podcasts. And if you don't like what we're doing, well, just go ahead and keep that to yourself. All right, let's get to this week's guest, host of the Singletrack podcast and an up-close observer to the unbelievable events at the 2024 Barkley Marathons, Finn Melanson. Welcome to Hiker Trash Radio, Finn. How's it going?
It is an honor to be here. I was telling you offline that while I am steeped currently in the trail running scene, my first love was always through hiking, and I love that you are doing this show, and I love that you're helping spreading the gospel of what I think is one of the most wonderful ways to spend time in nature.
It is transformational, and more people need to understand that. And people, they may think that it's for a certain type of person, and maybe it's not for them. They're not athletic enough, or they're not outdoorsy enough, but it is for everybody. Everybody needs to get out there and experience it firsthand.
Agreed. Yeah, I did a thru hike of the Appalachian Trail back in 2014, and there's this quote that goes something like, "The size of your pack is directly proportional to the size of your fear of the trail." And so I had decided to hike about a week before actually starting, went to a local REI, packed like cast iron pans, etc., into this thing, weighed 80 pounds, got to the approach trail. And, by the time I got to Neal's Gap, about 30 miles in, and did one of those famous pack shakedowns, I think I was probably 65 pounds lighter, and finally came to this realization of like, wow, this is a super cool thing.
Yes, we pack our fears. And that little story right there, it makes the back of my neck and right in between my shoulder blades really sore, just listening to that. I know. Yeah, many mistakes, but that's the way I learn best. I think I have to, before sound advice comes my way, I have to tinker, and I like to do things the hard way. Learning the hard way, of course. Now, I'm really excited to hear you talk about your trail experience, because I thought I was just talking to a Barkley expert, which in itself is very exciting. But throwing in your trail experience, even better. So we're going to have a great conversation today.
100%. I should add a caveat. I was a Barkley virgin this year as well. While I've covered a race from afar and had people like John Kelly and Jasmine Paris on the show in years past, it was my first year on the ground, and it never ceases to amaze me in this ever-growing digital world how you really have to go and have the on-the-ground experience to appreciate the gravity of the scenario, the culture, the personalities behind people like Lazarus Lake, the athletes. It revolutionized everything that I thought about it.
Yeah, I have been talking about the Barkley for a number of years now. I am fascinated by it. It is just a quirky race with a lot of mystique and really colorful characters. I've had the opportunity to have John Kelly on, John Fegabarisi, Aurelian Sanchez, Eeyore Veras, who just won this year, as well as some other very colorful characters. And as much as I try and soak it up through them, I really want to be there. I want to be there like you were, boots on the ground, and see it firsthand. And fortunately, I've gotten a commitment from a real contender out there who's going to be applying to the Barkley that he will bring me as his crew member. So I'm really pulling for him. I'm excited.
And I'll also add, because I had been trying to apply as a member of the media for many years, and I kept getting it wrong. And so I'll just add, I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say it live on this episode, but I found the process of trying to get in as a member of the media not quite as difficult, but there were certainly more hoops to jump through than, your typical application for a race like Western States or UTMB. I'm not saying there was a ton of bureaucracy involved, but it was unusual.
You see, I've already learned something. I didn't even know there was an application process for a member of the media to get there. Otherwise, I'd have been trying this a long time ago. I just thought it was Keith Dunn and his Twitter account that was allowed in the park on the day of the race.
Well, that's the other thing. I mean, Keith is sort of allowed to be the mouthpiece of the event. He does an excellent job at it. That was something I also got to witness, just how hard he has to work. You have to be always on. Like you see these athletes sort of go through it from a sleep deprivation standpoint for 60 hours to try to complete 5 laps. But by and large, for the most part, Laz is up for many of those 60 hours. Keith is definitely up for pretty much all of those 60 hours. It's amazing that his tweets don't fall apart as the race keeps going. He sticks with it. I mean, their stamina, that maybe one of my biggest takeaways from this year's event was just how much stamina a lot of the people that put on the event have. And maybe this is just a race director trait, and I just kind of appreciated it more with Barkley, but I was blown away by how much like spirit these people have and how dedicated they are to it, and how they just kind of set aside their personal health and needs and just get it done. Cause I don't do well with even a couple hours of sleep. I'm still kind of bursting at the seams. So it was impressive.
I think I'm going to include on my application that I am willing to go through that sleep deprivation process and do a live podcast stream for 60 straight hours. Let's do it.
The one other thing I would say for you, if you don't mind, a piece of advice: prepare for this experience as if you're preparing for an expedition to like base camp at Mount Everest. It gets super cold out there. I made the mistake of packing super light. It was pretty grim for me. I was sleeping in the front seat of a rented van, barely reclined. I had a $10 Walmart sleeping bag. It was not pretty, and I was borderline uncomfortable the whole time. All the veterans there, though, they have these pretty elaborate, comfortable setups. And so, yeah, like over prepare from I know I just said go ultra light in the backpacking space, but for Barkley, pack extravagantly.
I see that approach that you described that you had as just an exercise in solidarity with the runners out there. You wanted to experience a little bit of the pain that they were having out there.
I certainly felt it.
All right. Hey, Finn, have you picked up a trail name? You said you were on the AT. You did the AT. Did you pick up one there?
Yeah. So my trail name was The Politician. And the story behind that name was, so I did the trail back in 2014, and I got to Damascus, Virginia, which most people kind of know as like the spiritual, maybe it actually is like the quarter-way point heading north towards Katahdin. I got into Damascus 400 or 500 miles in, still didn't have a trail name, which I don't know kind of what the timeline is for acquiring, but it felt pretty late to me. Get to Damascus. I go to one of the hostels, and I can't remember which one it was, but I get there and there's already this crazy scene happening. Basically, it's the hostel owner and this other thru hiker, and they're having a dispute. The thru hiker, is low on money, and he's trying to do some sort of work for stay to make it possible. The hostel owner is having none of it. He's either in a bad mood or it's just not a part of their policy to allow that to happen. And I catch the majority of the dispute happening. And for whatever reason, I step in, and the thru hiker kind of steps aside, and I start having this debate about just like the ethics of allowing this person to stay. And we start to, there's like an audience forming, and we start to kind of speak out towards all the other people that have kind of like gathered around. And it looked like a debate stage, someone pointed out, because like we were both like, we were less arguing to each other and more trying to like convince the crowd. And after that moment, someone just called me the politician, because it felt like a debate stage, and that I was trying to like win, this like policy argument on behalf of thru hikers. So I embraced it. And then I think the rest of the way on the trail, it was always an awkward opening, because someone would say, what's your trail name? And I would say, I'm the politician. And they would almost always say, oh, well, I hate politicians, or like, are you for Trump? Are you for Joe Biden? Or, are you a libertarian? Are you a green? And I'm just like, it didn't really originate that way. I did work in politics for a while, coincidentally after the trail, but like, so funny origins.
Nice. I love that story. And I always love trail names that begin with the word the. I mean, it's like, it's very official, the politician. Nice.
Yeah.
Now, Finn, have you had a chance to listen to the podcast before? Do you know what you're getting yourself into today?
I have not, although I will say I heard the ad read for Garage Grown Gear, and I spend way too much time on that website. That's an awesome sponsor. And so I think after this episode, I probably will become a regular listener because you are my people.
Fantastic. You know, I only ask because I want to make sure that you know what you're getting into. And also we have a segment towards the end of every episode called the hiking hack. And that's where I will turn to you and ask you to share some trail wisdom with our listeners to make their next outdoor experience even better. So don't be surprised when we get there. And of course, you are expected to drop hiking hacks throughout the episode, but you'll be on the hook for at least one at the very end.
Of course. You got it.
All right. Hey, let's get to our first segment.
Trailblazers Toolkit.
That's right. It's time for the Trailblazers Toolkit, sponsored by the ultralight backpacking gear company 6 Moon Designs. Now, I'd love to talk about gear in the podcast, and I'd love to hear about the most important item in my guest's adventure gear. In today's episode, though, we're going to tweak this segment a little bit because I've got a seasoned podcaster in the studio, and I want to pick your brain. So here we go. Finn, if you were preparing for your next podcast episode, and I was the one providing you with all your recording gear, what is the one specific piece of gear you'd insist on being included? Give me all the details on that piece of gear and tell me why you've got to have it out there. This could be any kind of item. It could be related to your pre-episode prep, your actual recording, or your post-production work. So Finn, what is that item in your toolkit?
I think sound is essential. And I mean, as a podcaster yourself, you can probably tell there are some inadequacies in my sound. I record currently in a fairly echoey room. It's sort of being built out as we speak. I think sound is very essential. I think the easy answer is probably the Shure SM7B mic, which I love. It operates a lot better in different environments. But I think I want to focus more on post-production because I'm not a very technical person. And when I was getting into podcasting, that was sort of the bottleneck for me. It was like, I feel like I can host a conversation. I feel like I'm interested. Those parts I'm not worried about, but I am worried about the post-production piece and making sure that the sound is good and the guest sounds good and looks good, etc. I came across early on this software called Descript. Are you familiar?
Yes, absolutely.
This is more than for the audience, but I love Descript because it's super easy to edit. Basically, you can upload all of the audio files, the video files, and if there are inefficiencies or errors or things that you want to edit out of the conversation, you can literally highlight words or sentences or ums and ahs like I'm saying right now, and it's gone, and then you can just press publish. There's all these AI actions where like you can overdub your voice, and if you mispronounce something like I do all the time, or something just came out weird, you can highlight that section, and the AI is trained on your voice, and it can update everything. So I feel like I just happened to cross podcasting at this amazing era where the technical side of it became less intimidating and or a non-issue. This was back in 2021, and I have not needed to hire an editor or anybody else on the staff to get things done because these pieces of software have just covered the gap. It's been amazing.
Yeah, not a lot of money in the budget to hire extra people to do stuff for you, at least in my experience. And big shout out to Chad Lubinsky, trail name Chattahoochee. And it's also his Instagram handle, who also does a podcast. He turned me on to Descript, and it is fantastic. It's just like you say, it takes the audio files and it puts it into a Word document, and you highlight what you want to get rid of or fix, and boom, it fixes it for you. It's fantastic.
Yeah, I would say for anybody out there that has been on the fence about starting a podcast, and really their biggest worry, or like I said, bottleneck, is wondering if they can essentially publish it. Like if they can, after recording that gap between recording and publishing, if they're worried about that, I would say, don't worry. That's been solved for you. I mean, I don't know what you pay. I pay like $30-$40 a month for Descript. It's amazing.
Yeah, it's fantastic. All right. Hey, let's, okay. That was great. That was great podcasting segment. Let's get to some thru hiking and some trail type discussion with our next segment.
It's the hiking poll.
the hiking pole, and that's pole spelled with 2 L's, like a survey, not like the things you have in your hands out there. This is a 7-question survey, Finn. It's going to help me give you a score on the sanity scale from 1 to 100.
Great.
Now, with 1 being totally insane and 100 being completely sane. Now, anybody who has spent the night in a van in the front seat at the Barkley Marathons, there's an automatic point deduction of 25 points. So your top possible score today is 75.
Had that coming.
Yeah, that's reasonable, I think. In fact, that might be a little generous, I think.
I appreciate it.
All right. So these are 7 questions, all related to hiking, and it is not like word association. It's not just one answer and we move on. This is like you're back in high school. You have to show your work. So you're going to answer the question, and you're going to tell me why you answered it that way. That's going to help you with my scoring.
Okay, great.
All right, you ready for this?
Please.
Okay. Now, I love the trail name, The Politician, but when you were out on the AT in 2014, what was the best trail name you encountered out there?
Flash. So there was a guy. His name was Joey Campanelli, and I met him. I want to say somewhere in Tennessee. It was sort of on that Tennessee-North Carolina border, and he had the name Flash, which probably denotes speed, which it was. I had always thought that through hiking was this very like plodding activity, and if you were doing 15 miles a day, it was sort of like mind blowing. And it's that, by the way, that still is. I still believe that is an amazing human endeavor. But I met this guy, and he was doing 40 to 50 miles a day. He was basically running the trail. He was in a pair of New Balance Minimus shoes. I think he was in like a Mountain Laurel Designs burn pack, and he had ripped off the hip belt. He had like 1 water flask. He had dehydrated all of his food, and he was cold soaking it. Like, I think his base weight was like 5 pounds. And I was like, you gotta be kidding me. So yeah, I think I go with the name Flash because this guy who ended up, destabilizing my whole life. Like, I met him on the trail there, and then he's like, look me up after the fact. He basically set a northbound unsupported speed record. This was back in 2014. He's like, yeah, I live in Utah. I moved from Portland, Maine to Salt Lake City, Utah, like a year later, and got into this whole trail running thing. So because of that trail name Flash and meeting him there and seeing a whole alternative universe, even within the thru hiking sphere, that's what got me into trail running. And it was all because of a guy named Flash. So he kind of redefined what was possible on something like the AT.
That's a great answer on the first question right there. We got a lot of information. You're doing this just right, Finn. Now, Flash, you said denotes speed. It could denote one of 2 things. I was hoping it was speed. So, yeah, good on him. And then the fact that he destabilized your life, and you talk about him with such fondness. I mean, he obviously made a big impact on you.
Totally. Yeah. I think it would shock me if most people in this audience haven't had one of those experiences where you're pretty set in your ways, and then there is someone or something that you come across in life that is incredibly charismatic, and partly because of the charisma, but also partly because of the values and the lifestyle at play, you're just immediately attracted to it, and it makes you open and willing to reconsider everything that you had thought before. Even if you're not necessarily an open-minded person. And, that's what it was for me. I mean, I was on a totally different path. The AT was going to just be this sort of like faux rite of passage thing that I did just to kind of like signify that I was leaving sort of childhood, high school, college, and really having this like clean break and going into adulthood in the quote unquote real world. And when I met Flash, it opened up this whole other world. And it also opened up this whole idea that you can still remain at play and following your passions and following your bliss, like for as long as you want. It doesn't just end at like a certain age.
I would venture to say that all of us need a few more destabilizers in our life, kind of make us see things in a new light. And I also have a feeling that Flash probably would have scored very low on the hiking pole based on your description.
Yeah.
All right. Question number 2, when you're out there on the trail and you're hiking with others, what are the best 3 topics of conversation on the trail for you? What do you like to talk about out there?
Gosh, this is so I grew up, my parents were educators. My mom was a high school teacher and my dad was a federal judge. And so they were always so comfortable with like the most embarrassing topics, hotly charged topics. Like they would get home from work. I was like a latchkey kid. They would get home from work. We'd get to the dinner table and, instead of saying like, how was your day? My dad would just like kind of like put his fist down and he'd be like, what do you guys think about like this economic decision that, Bill Clinton's, economic advisor made today? And I'm like 8 years old at the time. Like, you're expecting me to have an opinion on this? Like, what are you talking about? So I typically go to things that transcend running. I really enjoy talking about like, philosophy, public policy, politics, just anything beyond running. I truly see the trail as this just excuse, because you're out there alone. You have a ton of time to kill to go beyond like the mechanics of the sport and the lifestyle of the sport. And you kind of have like permission to go beyond and maybe get into hot button issues. So, that's not everyone's cup of tea, which I appreciate. A lot of people are trying to escape that stuff, which I can't fault them for. But, that was one of the big surprises of the trail for me, was like, it ended up being this amazing arena for those types of topics.
A lot of people, they want to talk about food, what kind of food they're going to get in town. They're already dreaming about food a couple of days out on the trail. They want to talk about their bowel movements, the best tree to dig a cat hole behind. And the politician is out there talking about public policy and politics. I love it. This is fantastic. All right. Question number 3, toilet paper, bidet, leaves, sticks, rocks, snow. What's your preference out there?
I think there is undisputably a right answer here, and it's bidet. But I'll add the caveat that I have really never used a bidet. I've just heard that it's amazing and that everyone should get one. Like my wife and I at some point are going to do that. We'll go that route. But in terms of what I've used, like in the alternatives, yeah, probably toilet paper.
Yeah. I've been fascinated, oddly, by the bidet, by the thru hiking bidet, the portable bidet out there. And I'm like you, I've never used
a portable bidet exists.
Yes, I was asking about the trail. I wasn't asking if you had sticks or rocks in your bathroom at home. I was talking about on the trail. That's right. There is a portable bidet, and I'm fascinated. I've never used it because I'm concerned about how I would do out there with that. I mean, there has to be some learning curve in terms of your aim and efficiency with that. But
wow,
people swear by it.
I learned something new. I did not know that existed.
Okay. All right. I like the fact that you thought I was talking about sticks and stones and leaves in your actual bathroom. I mean, that's next level.
Well, some people, I live out here in Utah now, and I have a couple of friends who are out in the sticks for sure. And, they don't have normal bathrooms in their house. They have like those outhouses. And I've been in some of them that have sticks and stuff. So this was a totally naive answer on my part.
Fantastic. All right. Question number 4, breakfast in camp, on trail, or no breakfast for you?
Yeah, I think if I was to redo the trail, definitely breakfast in camp. In fact, I would try to do all meals, really like stopping it and enjoying it the European, like Italian way, where like you just stop everything, you sit down, you have a great conversation. There's like a bunch of courses and you just do it nice and slowly, you properly digest. And I think that like the Appalachian Trail, Pacific Crest Trail, perfect arenas to like try to get to that. I was so caught up in just like getting the miles done when I had my experience for various reasons that I was always eating in a rushed way. Like, yeah, I would pull out like the Cliff Bars and tuna mac and cheese and, those reheatable backcountry packs. Like I would do it all on the run. Like I had one of those, like strings around my neck and I attached like the, Ziploc bags to it. And I would like eat out of a trough like a pig. So there's like the version of me that was reality and the version of me that was, aspirational, and the realistic one is on the run.
The Europeans, they've got something right there. I talked to a Frenchman about his thru hike, and he brought a charcuterie board with him. I mean, that is the approach right there.
Yeah, I was over in Chamonix, France for a race called UTMB a bunch of the last few years, and I would try to go to these like awesome, pizza places, whatever, lunch places, restaurants, like they would just randomly close. You would just walk up to them, like the Google reviews would say, open, but they would just have a sign on the door that just said like, we're not here, and we don't even need to justify why we're not here. Like, we're just not here. And I was like, no, that's kind of cool.
Now, I'm going to have you back on the podcast because we need to talk about your UTMB experiences in another episode, because I'm also fascinated by that race. That sounds epic.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay.
Love to.
Question number 5. Do you prefer hiking by yourself or hiking with others?
Yeah, I'm an extroverted introvert. Like, it would be very easy for me to disappear off the face of the map and just have conversations in my head or just observe the natural world. I would be totally sustained. Like, I could go a long time. Having conversations takes a lot out of me. Like, I'm enjoying the hell out of this conversation right now. I will probably have to go on a walk after this just to decompress, because like there's a performative element to it, and you want to like show up for the show and stuff. So yeah, I think the answer is probably solitude. I think, like, as much as I've been building up my love of conversation and being a podcast host, I can go a long time. Like, my wife has to remind me, like, we should go on a dinner date with those friends, or like, you should join that group run because it's been a long time.
Finn, you are a study in contradictions, because conversations tire you out, yet you are a podcast host. I mean, that's what you do. You talk.
Well, I'm interested. I'm so interested. That's like the death knell. Like, I don't want to talk, but I'm also so interested.
All right. Question number 6, I believe. I'm going to give you 3 items, and I want you to rank them in order of preference. So I'm going to give you 3. You're going to say, this is my most favorite. This is the next most favorite. This is my least favorite of the 3. Ready? Here you go. 5 miles severe uphill, 5 miles severe downhill, 20-mile road walk.
So my favorite would be 5 miles severe uphill. 20-mile road walk would be number 2. And then easily the last would be 5 miles severe downhill. I just, like, the structure of my body was never meant to go downhill efficiently to begin with. It's something I've always struggled with. Yeah, I could use more hip flexion in my life. I need to like go to like a mobility person or yoga person on a regular basis. But uphill, I have the gait for it. I love it. And then 20-mile road walk, like, especially if there's a logical destination attached to the end of it, I could do that all day. Like, that's actually one of the things that got me, I think, that primed me for ultra running and through hiking, is like, when I was a kid, didn't really have access to a car. Parents didn't want to drive me anywhere. Had to navigate public transport a lot. If I wanted to go get like baseball cards or Pokemon cards, I had to like link up a bunch of checkpoints to get there on my own. So I don't mind the 20-mile road walks. I've done a fair number of them in my day.
Now, you continue to vocalize thoughts that I have never vocalized. I mean, I realize I should have said this much earlier in my life, that I need more hip flexion in my life. That's It's obvious now that I should have said that you said it for me. Thank you.
No problem.
All right. Question number 7, last question in the poll. When you're out there on the trail, what's on your head? Ball cap, floppy hat, straw hat, sun hoodie, no hat, visor, or some combination of those?
I love a good hat, although, as you can probably tell from the recording, I have an oversized head. Like, from the day I was born, I just had this massive noggin, and a lot of stuff doesn't fit me. My hair is starting to grow out a bunch too, so I've turned to like those headbands that can kind of push the hair back, and I've got a couple from Lululemon and Buff that are doing a pretty good job, and they're comfortable. But a lot of headgear historically has not worked for me, just because I got this massive noggin. So when I come across something, I'm super grateful, and I typically wear it out until it kind of turns to dust.
People are frantically looking for the YouTube video to take a look at your massive noggin. And I'll have to say that, you have a fairly normal looking head from my perspective. So I would not have thought that.
If you see me in person, you'll be like, oh my gosh.
That's a big head. All right. Hey, Finn, this is the mathematical portion of the podcast here, where I take your answers, I run them through the Hiker Trash algorithm, and we come up with a score for you. So stand by. I've got to do some math here. So I've got to carry the 3. We're going to divide that by √5, of course, and multiply by pi. And I'm going to make a slight adjustment for how many poop rocks you have in your upstairs bathroom there in Utah. And I come up with a score of 47, just south of the median, 47.
That's impressive. I don't typically do public math on my show. It's too intimidating. So That was impressive.
It's very complicated, and nobody knows if I got it right or wrong because, I'm doing the math. So I don't tell them the exact formula.
It's like in Hitchhiker's Guide when they're like, what's the answer to the universe? And the machine spits out 42.
That's right. That's right. I saw an article on that the other day, and there's actually some meaning behind 42. There's some symbolism, and I'd love to go into it with some coherence right now, but I don't remember the exact point. But it was not random. That was not a random answer by Douglas Adams. So interesting. Look it up. Give me some feedback. All right. Hey, before we get too far down the trail, Finn, let's back up a little bit. We'd love to hear about your background, where you grew up, what kinds of sports and hobbies you were involved in as a kid, and how in the world did you get involved in the outdoor adventure cult?
Yeah. So born in Western Massachusetts outside of Springfield, Mass. And like I said, parents were educators and a judge, also a lawyer at one point. So latchkey, and just was encouraged to make my own fun. Like there was not really much structure around my life. My parents were just like, look, you're going to go to school. There's going to be some time beforehand, some time after. And it's your responsibility to go out and find things that are interesting to you. I mean, I think like most kids, I gravitated towards sports, played a lot of ball sports, basketball, baseball, football, soccer, tennis, played it all, loved it. I was always the youngest kid in the neighborhood, ended up hanging out with people that were like 2-3 grades above me, got the shit beaten out of me in every single game. But I think it developed some like love of pain and staying power and stubbornness and resilience, and never touched running. Running was just always something you did to get to something else. Like it was just that like transitional thing. I wouldn't say that like I hated doing like the, warm up exercises, in football and stuff. Like it was fine, but like I never remember thinking to myself, this is awesome. I got to tap into this more. Did not get into thru hiking until 2022. So I was about to graduate college. This was like January of 2014. And I just loved college, like not the partying aspect of it. I did some of that, but like not the partying aspect of it, not the social aspect of it. I just loved showing up to class every day. Like my rationale was like, these professors have been spending their whole lives specializing in this niche bit of information. Like what a gift that I get to show up 90 minutes every Wednesday for the next 4 months and just like get that all synced into me. So I loved it. Like I think I like took like 7 classes every semester and just like couldn't get enough. But because I was so absorbed in that, it never occurred to me that I should go and start applying for internships and jobs and make that transition. And I just kind of like lost track of time. And by the time like February or March rolls around, I'm like, I have no idea what I'm going to do. Excuse me, I'm coughing here. Happened across this segment on like Nat Geo about like the most badass things you can do out in the wilderness today. And like one of them was the Appalachian Trail. And I was like, oh, that sounds pretty cool. And like I said earlier, just like by the time graduation rolled around, took my last final, like finally decided I'm going to do it. Went to a local REI, geared up, took a flight down to Atlanta. My aunt who lives in the area brought me to the approach trail and I got started. So yeah, I would say like a couple things that I think primed me for this lifestyle was had a lot of freedom growing up. My parents were not helicoptering me and kind of like shepherding me and kind of preventing me from being exposed to the real world. Like had a lot of freedom, which I think made me interested, and it made me easy to be self-sustaining in terms of finding interests. I always had to, if there was a reward for something, like if I wanted something, like I said, baseball cards or Pokemon cards or to hang out with friends, I was always required to like do this sort of endurance feat to get to it. Like I had to ride the buses, I had to walk many miles, that kind of stuff. So there was already, I guess, this reward associated with endurance. And then, yeah, like I just think like there wasn't much in my culture growing up that like signified a rite of passage. And this is something that I've started to appreciate a lot more in Utah. I'm not Mormon, but like I live around the Mormons. And one thing I think they do super well is they have a system like where people go through a rite of passage that clearly denotes that like they're in a new phase of life. And people who are, agnostic or atheistic or not attached to any form of like religious community, for a lot of us, that's not available. And I think it's a huge miss. So I was just very lucky to come across the ATB because that ended up being the thing for me. And yeah, I'm rambling here, but that's some of it.
Nice, you are. And a big shout out to all the other latchkey kids out there. I was a latchkey kid as well, left to my own devices, and somehow we made it through. So
I think better off. I mean, this is something I feel strongly about. Like, I think there's a different world right now for a lot of kids, and I lament it. Like the screens and the overprotection and the fears from parents. I don't know. I have a kid on the way, by the way. I'm 5 months away from my wife giving birth, and like I cannot wait to do my best to recreate the experience that my parents gave me. I thought it was awesome.
Congratulations. And you mentioned earlier that we kind of pack our fears, right? I think we also parent our fears.
Totally.
And so I think there is a lot of parenting out there that really takes away, I don't know, agency from the child, and creates a situation where at some point, they're going to be on their own and they're going to have to figure some stuff out. And if they've never had the chance to figure stuff out, I mean, it's going to be difficult.
Yeah. To me, that's my fear. That's my parenting fear, is that my kid becomes an adult, they leave the nest, and they have no sense of agency because they've never been required to brush up against failure, uncertainty, and just that experimentation process.
Yeah. I mean, the goal is economic independence, right? Yeah. And luckily for me, I was 3 for 3. I've got three kids, all adults now, all gainfully employed. So
I was gonna say, you look great. You look, for someone that has 3 kids out of the nest, you look, I hope to look like you when I'm your age.
Go, keep talking, Finn. Keep talking. Yes, I'm going to take the win. I'm going to take the win on raising 3 great kids and to getting them out and being productive members of society. So, all right. Hey, we're going to take a quick break. When we come back after the advertisers, we're going to hear about round 0 at the Barkley Marathons 2024 with Finn. So stay tuned for that. We'll be right back. And welcome back. We're talking to Finn Melanson. By the way, did I pronounce the last name correctly, or am I butchering it?
No, it's Melanson, but I'll tell you a funny story. So people in many different ways will mispronounce it, and we used to start getting telemarketing mail, not telemarketing, but just like, marketing spam mail to our house, and they addressed it as Mel Anson, Mr. and Mrs. Mel Anson. And so I always tell that story to help with the pronunciation because it's pretty funny.
Mel Anson. Got it. That's a good story too. Now, we talked about your origin story in terms of outdoor adventure, getting out there on the AT. But tell us about your fascination with the Barkleys. Where did that come from? How did that grow? And how did you end up at the 2024 Barkley Marathons?
Yeah, I think the fascination with it is just an appreciation for the counterculture and anything. Like, my parents were Deadheads growing up. They loved the Grateful Dead. They followed the Grateful Dead, and like the Grateful Dead for a long time until they kind of became mainstream themselves, represented like that check on sort of like the white picket fence mainstream culture. And so I'm always looking for the equivalent of that in my sport. Like, I am very much interested in Western States, in UTMB, in the Golden Ticket Series, and the Golden Trail Series, and all of these very branded, very corporate, very mainstream events in our sport. Like that stuff, like I love it. But I also love these people in these races that are observing those events, and they're wondering, like, should the exact opposite of that also exist, and should that be thriving, and how can we facilitate that? And if you look at every single component of the Barkley Marathons, in a lot of ways, it's almost like the middle finger to everything else that kind of stands in our sport. And I mean, you mentioned the contradictions earlier. I am a walking contradiction, and I have somehow found both of these appetizing. I think they're awesome. And I think it also shows among consumers as well. Like and I could tell you, like, if I look at the analytics behind my podcast and all the other media we do, there is equal, if not more, intensity of engagement around Barkley as there is for these other theoretically bigger events. So I think that says a lot. And then how I got to the Barkley Marathons this year, like I said, I had 2 straight years of misses. I thought that I was applying the right way. I thought that I was doing it well ahead of time. It turns out I was not. And it took 2 times. It's like the fool me twice thing. Took me 2 times to kind of figure it out. Finally nailed it last fall, got in. And yeah, so like Laz is so interesting. His whole operation, it's not just meant to disorient runners and challenge runners. He also disorients the crew, disorients the media, disorients people that are trying to follow along. Yeah, so that's the short of it.
Thank you. I want to talk about something you mentioned there about, the Deadheads, Grateful Dead, how they were kind of counterculture, and then they eventually became mainstream. Does the Barkley run that risk as well? I mean, it has been increasing in popularity. More and more people on the planet are aware of what the Barkley is and how wild it is. And just through that process of becoming more popular, do they run the risk of becoming mainstream?
Yeah, I mean, and again, if we look at the Grateful Dead, like you look at Jerry Garcia, I think he was always, even in the late 80s and early 90s, he was still trying to like disavow all of these labels about being a messiah and being this answer to all of life's problems and being someone worth following. Like I don't think, except for the drug use, which I'm sure he did to kind of medicate for the situation, he was very like vocal about, trying to not get all caught up in that. And I think it's actually the same way with Laz. Like I actually asked Laz this question in camp. I said, look, this race has taken on a whole nother dimension. The BBC's covering it. The New York Times is covering it. There are hundreds of thousands of people that are living and dying by Keith Dunn's tweets. Do you feel like this whole attention bubble has affected you in any way? And his answer to it was like, if this had happened to me when I was in my 20s or my 30s or my 40s, it might be a different story. I am super fortunate that it happened to me in my 60s when, from like a personality standpoint, outlook standpoint, career stability standpoint, I was in a good place. And I thought that was really interesting. Like, I think he would tell you, and I tend to believe him, that he's largely been unaffected by the fame, and he's retained all of the quirky elements that made sort of the early adopters on the adoption curve attracted to this, and what made the race special. So do I think it runs the risk? For that reason, no. Although it is interesting, we're actually in a transition as we speak. So this was, I believe, Laz's last official year as race director. There's a new race director coming in next year, Carl Laniak. Laz is still going to be on the scene, but Carl's going to be calling all the shots. Like I think he's going to be blowing the conch. He's going to be lighting the cigarette if he keeps doing that. He'll be, counting pages, etc. And I found Carl to be like, and Laz is an iconoclast, right? Like, how do you replace that personality? How do you replace that person? You don't. But one of the things that I found myself thinking about throughout camp was like, Laz is a pretty good second. I'm sorry, Carl is a pretty good second act. Like, this guy's witty. He has a lot of Laz's temperament in a lot of ways. He has experience on the course as a runner from like 10, 15 years ago. And there's like an intangible factor to him too. And I think Barkley will just kind of develop around his personality in a similar way it developed around Laz's that we just can't, envision yet. But I think it's going to mostly stay the same. I would actually be shocked if we see any unraveling of, what made this race tight-knit and mysterious and interesting.
I hope so. And again, I've learned something new. Didn't realize that this was Laz's last year as race director. I'd heard rumors that eventually he's going to kind of hand over the reins to somebody else. And, is it a prerequisite to be a curmudgeon to take over race director of the Barkleys?
It's so funny. There's a lot of things. And again, Laz is also a walking contradiction. Like, I was trying to gauge him personally, politically, existentially, and he would have comments and he would make actions that would initially make me think he was this, and then he would do the exact opposite 20 minutes later or a day later. And so I'm not even sure that curmudgeon is the right word anymore. I would have said that, by the way, like before this this interview and before this Barkley experience. But like, yeah, it's amazing. Like, and also for somebody, it reminds me, like, for somebody who is so interested in creating the antithesis to the modern day ultramarathon. He's also very by the book, very numbers oriented, very rule driven. Like, he is very tight knit in how runners execute this race, the process of counting pages. It's mind blowing.
All right. And what an opportunity for you to be there at ground zero during Laz's last year as race director.
Yeah.
Phenomenal.
Yeah. It was incredible. It's a community. That's one of the first things that I discovered, is that a lot of people who go to this race to crew and to kind of be a part of a media, we can talk about that too. Like, they've been coming for years on end, and it's a reunion of sorts. And like, I remember the day before the race, there's sort of a ceremony that takes place where you go to Brushy Mountain State Penitentiary, and you walk with Laz behind the penitentiary, and he tapes up the book for that spot on the course, and you get to kind of film it and talk with him about it and just see that all go down. And it very much feels like he's like a pastor or a priest or some sort of figurehead like that in that experience. Like, you can tell that when you're talking to him that he very much treats it like a ceremony, and a lot of the lines that he's giving you on that particular day have been choreographed, but somehow in a very authentic way. Like, you can almost imagine that what he is saying to you right here, he had also said to last year's generation of media, and then the previous ones. Like, he's been doing the same shtick for like 20 years, but it's very authentic, and you still find a ton of meaning in it. So yeah, it was just stuff like that. Like, it was amazing. I interrupted you, by the way. I apologize.
That's okay. No, not at all. That's great. He is a keeper of the knowledge, right? Keeper of the knowledge of the Barkley. And it throws back to what you said earlier about those professors in college and your appreciation for them and how they were experts in these niche fields. I mean, same thing with Laz, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I mean, that's a really good comparison. Yeah. You almost like, and that's one of the reasons why I want to keep going back, because I felt like I did an okay job of extracting all of these parables out of Laz and these worldviews and just interesting commentary on the sport and like the human condition. But I also feel like there's still this like deeper source, this deeper well. And if I keep going back, it's like putting the puzzle pieces together on his outlook. And it's one of the most interesting, non-linear, non-coherent, but then maybe it is if you really think about it, worldviews. It's just he's even more complex than is portrayed in the films, in the media, etc. Like, the in-person is even more mind-blowing.
Now, I was going to say, if you keep going back and listening to the professor out there talk about the Barkley, at some point, I was going to say that you get a master's degree from all the college credit that you're accumulating. But I think from your last description, there might be a doctorate in Barkley.
I just got my associates this year.
There you go. All right. Now, tell us, what was your actual function? What was your responsibility at the Barkley? What were you doing out there this year?
Yeah, so we over at Singletrack, we do some work with a shoe company called Brooks, and they have an athlete, Joe McConaughey, who this audience probably knows, Spring Bean, one of the best long distance thru hikers of all time, set one of the most amazing records on the AT back in like 2017, I want to say. Also, just other long distance trails, incredible. We were going to make a film about him. So we actually went out and followed his experience. He ended up dropping on lap 2 with an ankle injury. And so after that, things just kind of became free form, and we just followed the entirety of the race. But yeah, it was a media project. Like, I was kind of looking for a reason to get out there and make it kind of financially possible. And we had been working with them on other stuff in previous months and years. And I'm good friends with Joe, and he told me, he's like, hey, I'm going back, and maybe we can do something together. And I was like, great. So things changed kind of midway through. I don't know if we'll actually come out. We have a lot of content on Joe. Like, we went out to his home in Seattle and followed him doing like a final Barkley effort on Cable Line, which is Tiger Mountain, one of the trails on Tiger Mountain, and then got a lot of like pre-race stuff in camp and some stuff from lap 1 and 2. But it doesn't have that like narrative arc closure to it. So maybe we do something on Jasmine Paris, because we've got all sorts of footage from that. And yeah, so that was the initial reason for going out.
Yeah, String Bean, quite an athlete, quite a guy, and wish he did not get that ankle injury and would have gone a bit further. That would have been incredible to see the race from his perspective. And speaking of Jasmine, somebody has to be making a documentary about her finish. I mean, just has to. I mean, I saw the documentary 17 by Carl Sabe that was released, just before the Barkley came out for this year. It's about his experience last year when he set the SKT on the Barkley with like six or 7 minutes to spare. And Jasmine, I said this before on the podcast, I'll say it again just because it's so appropriate, that Jasmine told Carol Sabe, said, hey, hold my beer while I show you what SKT really means.
No, you're right. And, she is such an interesting person. We used the term destabilizing earlier, and like in a good way, I would apply that word to what her impact on the trail running community could be. So not only did she just complete the Barkley Marathons when everybody had been saying for years, even on that 3-day stretching camp, all of the, veterans there, not the athletes, but like a lot of like the veteran spectators and whatnot were saying, I've run all the numbers, the math, the logic, the science, everything says that this is impossible. Like everybody's getting worked up over something that's just not going to happen. Once that narrative got totally blown to bits when she touched the gate, that's just one of the destabilizing pieces, what this means for women in the sport. But she's also coming at the sport from this really interesting environmental angle. Like she's the co-founder of this group called the Green Runners, which is trying to make everybody rethink their attitudes around travel and consumption and gear use around these events. So before I interviewed her a couple days ago, I noticed on the first day that she was wearing shoes that had like Styx patches on them. She was using this out of date Ultimate Direction pack from like 2013. Her clothes were like kind of raggedy. And I learned in the interview that she had worn the exact same pair of shoes for all 3 Barkley attempts that she's made. And she's done all the training in them too. And I mean, I didn't ask her the exact mileage, but I think she's put like 1,500 to 2,000 miles on these shoes. So like there's that destabilizing element too, where like I think she wants to use this platform, this historic finish at Barkley, to spread this gospel around like possibly overconsumption and also like just like women's representation in sports. Like we'll see how this kind of ensues over the next couple months and years, but yeah, there's a lot there. If someone ends up making a film, it's not necessarily just the finish. It's a whole lot else culturally, socially, economically at stake.
A lot of material right there. Fantastic. I can't wait to see it. Someone's got to do it. Now, Finn, I'm going to be a little selfish here because, as I mentioned, I'm hoping to be either at the Barkley under a media permit, or they're helping to support a runner in the race, being a crew member. And so I really want to pick your brain about, what were some of the activities that were going on pre-race? What were your impressions? How soon did you get there ahead of time? And then also I want to talk about life in camp during the race. I mean, the runners leave and there's a period of time where it's just the crew and the media there for hours while the runners are out there trying to complete these loops. What's going on in camp during that time?
So I got there about 12 hours in advance of when it is possible for the conch to be blown. And for people that are not familiar, at some point between 11 p.m. and 11 a.m. of race day, Laz can blow the conch, and that means that there is an hour left of preparation for runners before he starts the race. And this is one of his favorite parts of the whole event, I kind of learned, because there's so much uncertainty. Runners have no idea. Media has no idea. Laz is the only person that knows when this race is going to start. So we got there about 12 hours before that, started to set up camp. A lot of this is, again, it feels like a family reunion. You're not doing much in the way of like, there's a whole schedule of events to follow. Like we did go out to the penitentiary to see the book taping. That was about it. There's probably an hour long packet pickup that takes place, where people turn in their license plates and they receive the map for the first time. But beyond that, in those 12 hours, I'm mostly walking around camps. I'm observing people who have just received that map study the map, and maybe they're with a veteran who's done this race multiple years in a row, seeking counsel, seeking advice, drawing on it, landmarks, a lot of that. And then I think it's also fascinating just to study sort of like the body language and the talk that's coming out of these runners that are getting ready. Like we got to follow Joe McConaughey during this same period of time, and seeing him like pack and unpack and talk with his crew chief, Whit Weisbraham, who I think, by the way, would be a great person for this show. He's a kind of a legendary member of the thru hiking community. Seeing them kind of go back and forth on logistics and strategy. It's just a lot of that. Like if you're a super fan of logistics and the study of topography and then also just like the human condition, like seeing these people grapple with the fact that they're hours away from, a possibly 60-hour sufferfest. It was just a lot of that. As soon as the race starts, the reunion part comes in. Like it's a lot of hurry up and wait. You want to make sure you're at the gate at certain times. The Rat Jaw Climb, which is the one other place you can see runners on the course, that's either a 4.5 mile direct hike from camp, or you can leave camp in a car, drive about 20 minutes, and you can do this slightly easier, like 2.5 mile hike up a Forest Service road to get there. But that's about it in terms of action. Otherwise, it's just like you're sitting and you're talking with Laz for 30 minutes. And then it's like, okay, that was a really good conversation. I'm going to go talk with Jared Campbell's wife. Like, I'm really curious to know like what she's thinking about, or you just start talking about life and random stuff because there's just so much time to pass. The one other cool thing I would add is there's kind of a barbecue that happens every day. Like it always seemed like whether it was Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday, one of the like crew/media veterans was doing like a big breakfast for the camp, or they were doing a big dinner for the camp. There always seemed to be food around, and I probably only took them up on it like twice. I think I'll take them up on it more in the ensuing years because Wartburg, Tennessee, which is the area outside Frozen Head, is kind of a food desert. Like we were subsisting off of Taco Bell and Hardee's and like Carl Jr.'s and Subway, and like my stomach was kind of hurting after the fact. So yeah, if you like conversation with kind of quirky people, that's basically what the 3 days are from our standpoint.
Now, did you wander over to Jared Campbell's wife and start talking to her about public policy and philosophy?
No, I didn't. But like Laz is super down, and that's not because I wouldn't. I know his wife Mindy is super awesome. Like I actually know her from like the Salt Lake City scene. We've had those types of conversations. But like for people that I was unsuspecting for this kind of stuff, Laz was totally down for it. Like we would get into all of these conversations about like air quality and urbanization and like the changing of the guard in rural America. It was just tectonic plates and like the geology of the eastern seaboard. Like he's game for any conversation. Like if you go next year, if you want to create like a Jeopardy board of just topics, like bring him ahead of time and just start talking with Laz, and he's totally down.
Nice. That's a great idea. Now, we're talking about the Barkley, which is at the upper end of what is physically possible by a human being. And so you have that anxiety already. And then you have uncertainty about the start time. You have uncertainty about the course itself because, first timers, they haven't had a chance to experience the course itself. And uncertainty produces anxiety. And so already you're anxious about this incredible sufferfest as you've described. But then the circumstances around the start of the race, when is it going to start, and being on edge until you hear that the conch being blown and the lighting of the cigarette, what kind of impact does that have on first time runners out there? I mean, were you able to see it on their faces?
Yeah, I think, well, I'll say one thing. I was actually surprised at how unaffected from my vantage point people were by that. In the conclusion I came to for why that was the case is this race, the application process is so difficult, and the preparation for this race is so difficult. I suspect that it self-selects for people who have prepared so thoroughly that by the time they get there, they're just going through the motions for the most part. One of the things that blew me away about Barkley is how dangerous of a race it is, but how nobody in that field walks away having a near-death experience or getting seriously hurt or needing to be like medevaced off the course. And I think it's because the application process is so tough, and people know ahead of time that they have to have a certain skill set, that they just approach the race differently. Like you think about normal races, race directors, like they're putting up guide rails everywhere around like, runner safety and making sure that people, have aid stations and whatnot. Barkley has none of that. And it's probably like on balance numbers wise, a safer race than Western States and UTMB. And that's mind blowing given how much individual human agency is involved and people are just left to their own devices. And so I think that's why I didn't see it on their faces as much. I'm sure people were nervous and skittish and didn't sleep well. Like you've seen all the documentaries where, like Gary Robbins will be like, I didn't sleep much last night, but like whatever, because, they're nervous. But like, I didn't notice like the existential dread or like true fear. And I think it's because of that.
Yeah, there's nobody out on the course to help you. There's no aid stations out there. The only aid station is the camp when you finish the 25-mile loop and you're back in it.
There's a water drop at Rat Jaw, but that's it. Like you can go there and Laz has water. I think there was going to be one other water drop at some point and they nixed it, or maybe it ended up being there, but it's super minimal. Yeah, super, super minimal.
And I know that in some years the water's been frozen.
Yeah, exactly.
Because it just got too cold out there.
Snowed some years. Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Hey, Laz kind of took it up a notch this year. He added a brand new section, and I've just discovered that it was called the Rusty Spoon. And I think it was Carl Laniak. Yeah, Carl Laniak said it was like Rat Jaw on cocaine.
Yeah, and I'll say this. I think that, I'll say two things. One, Laz has said numerous times, this is not an original statement, that it would be uninteresting and easy to make a course that was either something that everybody could finish or something that nobody could finish. And the real challenge is making something that is on the true edge of human possibility. Like there's like an art form to that, like what Laz has created is sort of like the Sistine Chapel of that. But I actually think that if the weather had been bad this year, nobody would have finished like this. He might have created an impossible course in certain conditions. And it was crazy because it was dry the entire time, all 60 hours. It was basically bone dry. My colleague, our videographer, had accidentally left their phone on top of Rat Jaw. So like an hour after the race, we had to go hike back up, and it was literally an hour after the race and it was downpouring. And both of us looked at each other and were like, I mean, Eeyore Varus, as you know, you interviewed him, finished with like an hour and 10, 15 minutes on the clock. But 4 of the other 5 finishers finished with 30 minutes or less to spare. Definitely none of those 4 are finishing. Maybe Eeyore is not even finishing. So like there could have been a huge weather assist this year. Like if it was foggy, rainy, inclement weather, snow, ice, like we could be talking about like, did Laz like hit that point of like the edge or over the edge of human possibility?
Yeah, and quick correction, it was not Carl that had said that. It was Naresh Kumar described it as Rat Jaw on cocaine, talking about the new section, the Rusty Spoon. And I think I talked about it with Eeyore that if Jasmine takes an extra 25 seconds in camp on each of her 4 stops in camp after a loop, she doesn't finish. Totally. She doesn't finish. That's how thin the margin is.
And this is something that maybe people in the audience weren't aware of, but Laz, and I don't know if he's ever done it, but people going out on certain laps, it is at Laz's discretion. Like if he observes you and you truly are in this like beyond depleted state and it's dangerous for you to go out, like I think he will hold you back. I don't know if he's done it before, but like I only say that because Jasmine looked pretty rough on that lap 4 to 5 transition. If you were a betting person and you saw her condition there, you would not have probably placed the bet that she was going to cover that final lap with time to spare. It was wild. Eeyore looked great. Yeah, I couldn't believe how much of a machine he was out there. I don't know if he said this to you. I feel like I should say it for him. He's one of the most class act athletes that I've ever come across. Most athletes, rightfully so, they're in the pain cave. They kind of go silent. They don't have the energy to engage with spectators, crew. Every single time we saw Eeyore, like if it was a photographer like Howie Stern, he'd be like, "Thank you so much, Mr. Stern, for being out on the course and documenting this. Finn, thank you so much for being here. Love the," he would kind of flatter me. "Love the podcast." And like my first reaction was like, this guy is in the pain cave. He's suffering. He's in Barkley, and he has the mental energy and wherewithal and selflessness to, thank and flatter the people around him. It was wild. That just blew me away.
Yeah, Eeyore, top-notch guy. Top-notch, definitely. And your description of Jasmine in that transition between loop 4 and 5 and how rough she looked, it makes her story even more incredible. I mean, miraculous.
Yeah.
Fantastic.
Yeah. It was crazy. So on every single lap, especially 3, 4, and 5, my crew and I, we would go up to Ratchaw and we would wait there sometimes for many hours on end for the runners to go through, just to get a sense of how soon they would be back in camp. And then based on that, we'd kind of rush back to camp and get things ready. We saw Eeyore go through, did not see Damien go through, saw Jared and John Kelly go through. The last person was Jasmine. And this was maybe 3 hours and 45 minutes, 3.5 hours before the 60 hours was up. And we really needed her to be there by about the 3.5 hour mark to make this even barely realistic, even barely possible. Didn't see her. So we start to double back on that Forest Service Road, kind of dejected, heading back to the car. And we're thinking, yeah, maybe Eeyore will finish. Jared and John might finish. Haven't seen Damien, so not looking good. And Jasmine, like we were really hoping she would get it done. She's out there clearly. Don't think she's going to get it done. We're maybe a half mile down that Forest Service Road. And there's one other kind of weird secret place where you could see a runner if you time it correctly. And it's the moment when they hop over that Forest Service Road and they hop on the final ridgeline to get up to Ratchaw. And we happened to see Jasmine there. She was crossing the road. She was maybe like 1/10 of a mile, maybe a 1/4 mile away from the summit of Frozen Head Mountain and about to descend down Ratchaw. And that was with like 3 hours and 28 minutes left. And so we were like, man. And then she smiled at us too. Like she had given no emotion for the majority of the 4 laps we saw her, but like she saw us, she smiled, and I interpreted that as it's game on. I don't know if she's going to make it, but she's going to try. And so we brought that news back to camp, and it was really fun. And I remember seeing her husband, who was kind of waiting very nervously by the point at the lower part of camp where you'll see the runner come out of the woods finally, and they had that like 3/10 of a mile climb up to the gate to touch it. And her husband's awesome. He's like a accomplished ultra runner himself, Conrad. And I remember saying to Conrad, I believe, like this was with like 10 minutes left. I was like, I believe, I think this is going to happen. He's like, and I think he was nervous. So he was like, what proof do you have? And I was like, I just believe, I think it's going to happen. And we saw her come out of the woods like 5 minutes later. And I was partially like dejected because I thought back to the Gary Robbins scenario where like he came out the wrong way, but also finished with like 6 seconds over time. And I saw her come out and there was like, 4 minutes left. And I just like look up the hill and I was like, she's got to cover that 3/10 of a mile, 7 to 15% grade climb in 4 minutes. She's probably got nothing in the tank. So she covered it, but like you can see in all those finish line videos and photos that it took everything out of her. She lost her voice. Her whole body kind of collapsed on her. It was a miracle. It was amazing. Like the universe conspired with her to make it possible.
Yeah, Eeyore talked about that section, that finishing section. It looks flat on the documentaries, but it is not flat. It is uphill. It is a brutal stretch, especially if you're under that kind of pressure. And I tell you what, if you can be 56.5 hours deep into the pain cave and smile when you see somebody, it is game on. It is definitely game on. That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was awesome. It was just the humanity of it. Like you could tell that she had willed herself into this mindset where she was still going to try. And I think that's the big takeaway for me. I actually am less impressed by the finish, which is still impressive. I'm most impressed by her courage to give it a try, especially when, like, rationally speaking, she was out of time. Like, in order to do what she did in that final 3.5 hours, she had to run that section at the exact same speed that she ran it on the first lap. So, you know, you talk about smelling the barn and that whole central governor theory where, like, you know, your brain kind of artificially suppresses effort because it wants to kind of protect against, you know, damage you might do, but you really have like 40% left. Like, she totally uncapped the central governor, and, you know, she had this motivation well outside of that whole like smelling the barn type scenario where you're like a mile out. Like, she was 3.5 hours out and was still like, I'm in it.
I love that concept, the central governor. That's the first time I've heard that concept. Is that a runner's type insight?
Yeah, there's a book called Lore of Running by Tim Noakes, who is, I guess at this point, he's actually a fairly controversial exercise physiologist because he's sort of, I mean, some people would say he's controversial because he's kind of taken some strong stances on carbohydrates and hydration and stuff like that. But he wrote this book, Lore of Running, back in 1985. And this is like a generally accepted principle, I think, now among like mental performance people, that there's this concept of the central governor where when you think you've hit a wall or you think you've hit a limit, you still probably have like 40 to 50% capacity left, but your brain has put your body into this like self-protective cocoon where it like makes you want to stop because it's scared that you're actually going to truly hit that wall of 0%. So when you hit that wall, you really probably have like half of your tank left. But it's like an evolutionary thing. Like your evolutionary like former self hasn't evolved to this modern era of like, you know, it probably thinks that like you don't have access to calories anytime soon or water. And so it's like a self-protective thing. But if you can, you know, philosophically like wrap your mind around what your brain is trying to do, you can kind of override if you want. And I think Jasmine probably overrided.
Now, that really resonates with me, not because I've ever finished one of my marathons at a sprint down the final stretch to the finish line, but I have been on several hikes where we've approached the finish, the end point of the hike, and I've just put it into another gear and have just left my hiking buddies in the dust. Chopper will attest to this. I know he's listening out there. If it's the last day, Doc is going to be somewhere in the distance up ahead, because he's just going to kick it in another gear. So that makes sense to me.
Right on.
Well, Finn, thank you so much. Let's explore what you do for a living. Actually, I'm not sure if you do it for a living or if it's just a hobby. Let's talk about the Singletrack podcast. How long have you been doing that? What's the content? What can people expect when they tune into an episode?
Yeah, we started back in August of 2021. So we're probably at like the 2.5, 3-year mark right now. It did start as a podcast and basically started as content that was covering sort of the professional trail and ultra running scene, but we also get into a lot of like the business and the culture of the sport as well. I would say it is mostly elite oriented just because my background, I've always been interested in like NFL, NBA, MLS, NHL, like pro sports. And so I just kind of wanted to take those interests and port them over to trail. But we do talk with a lot of like race directors and operators and kind of cultural figures too. It was a podcast for a while. You know, we monetized through ads and still have that in operation. But then we got a lot into race coverage. So we'll do a lot of like, if you're familiar with like the concept of like College Game Day on ESPN for football, we do a lot of that type of stuff for trail running events like Western States and UTMB. And then we sort of have like a content marketing agency arm to it too, where like, you know, a brand like Black Diamond or Hoka or, you know, Brooks will reach out and they'll be like, hey, you know, we just signed XYZ athletes, or we have this roster of events for 2024 and we want people who can create, you know, awesome video, photo, audio content around it. Do you want to work together on like XYZ projects this year? So we do that as well. But I would say the podcast is the first love. You know, like being here is such a joy with you. It's especially fun to talk with fellow podcast hosts because like we've just been doing it long enough that the flow is great. And yeah, it's been great. I do it full time. Prior to this, I worked in politics for 4 years, really enjoyed that. And then also worked in marketing, for a lot of software companies, and not too dissimilar to this. Like I love the idea of, I love the mechanics that are required to get what I believe is a good idea to a broader swath of people. And that's really what I see marketing as. Like, a lot of people see it as like this sort of grimy, got to do it, but don't really feel good doing it. I've always thought, like, if you strongly believe in an idea or a person or an event, it is incumbent on you not just to think that that thing is going to get out there itself. Like, distribution is super important. And so, picked up a lot of skills in politics and in my marketing background that I think ported over well to this business.
And do you want to name drop some guests you've had on your podcast?
Yeah, a couple. I mean, we just had Jasmine Paris on the show. I think one of my biggest heroes in the sport, a person that I think this audience would really identify with. In fact, if you have a chance to talk with him, he's incredible, is Jared Campbell, who is a 4-time finisher of the Barkley. He is this artist when it comes to route creation. He is the genius behind the Wasatch Ultimate Ridge Link Up, which I think a lot of people in your audience might know. The Millwood 100. He's a really cool, like, environmental advocate. Created the Running Up for Air series. He's just, and I don't know if he's done a lot of thru hikes, but he's totally this like hybrid mountain athlete, trail runner, climber type that he does great kind of in any endurance conversation setting. And then, yeah, just a lot of kind of luminaries in the trail running space, like the Jim Walmsleys, the Courtney DeWalters. We've talked with them. A lot of operators behind the scenes that probably don't have name recognition, but they just, if you're interested in how the sport hums, how it works, how it gets funded, we've had a lot of those conversations. We do a lot of like panel shows. Like, we have this one thing called the Long Run Archives, where we try to simulate what people talk about when they're on a run. Things kind of get spicy, they get interesting. And there's typically like 2 people, myself and my colleague Brett, who are mainstays. And then we bring in a guest host kind of every time. And we just pick hot button issues, and we just tackle them. We kind of offer our takes, and it's a nice break from the interview format. So, yeah.
Love that. And I'd love to talk to Jared Campbell. It is not a prerequisite to be a thru hiker or a hiker on the podcast here, because Hiker Trash Radio, we cover all branches of the outdoor adventure tree. We've talked to squirrel suit flyers. We've talked to big wall climbers. We've talked to documentarians, all kinds of people involved in the outdoor space. So not a prerequisite.
Right on. Yeah. No, he's awesome. He's a hero.
All right. Hey, what is the next big adventure for Finn?
I think this audience will appreciate it. I'm doing a race called the Cocodona 250, which runs from Black Canyon City, Arizona, up to downtown Flagstaff. And it's just this awesome multi-day soul quest. I think there's a lot of people in the thru hiking community that I think would appreciate it, because it's not really a running race. Most people will take 3 to 5 days to complete it. There are a lot of thru hikers that have come in, like the Josh Perrys of the world, that have had a lot of success here. And you just cover a lot of the most beautiful features of central and northern Arizona along the way. Like, you get immediately up into the Bradshaw Mountains, touch Mingus Mountain. You get into the Arizona Trail area, Sedona. You climb Eldon before dropping down into downtown Flag. It's just, there's a guy in our sport, Jamil Curry, who runs Aeroviper Running. He'd be another great person to have on the show.
He's been on.
He's been on. Awesome. Yeah. He's another guy that I
really
just love.
Really enjoyed talking to him.
Interesting guy. Jamil's awesome. So he's sort of the brainchild behind it. He's not the race director, but it's under sort of his organization. But he had always wanted to create something that was less about the distance and more about just like, I have this really aesthetic line that I want people to experience, and it just happens to be 250 miles, and let's just do it. And so it's really a piece of art for him. I think it means a lot. And you can tell in the way the race is executed. Like, the aid stations are great. Course is well marked. People really enjoy it. It's not a contrived experience. Like, every single step on the course means something. You're going in a direction to a place kind of like the Arizona equivalent of, Mount Katahdin if we're talking about the Appalachian Trail. So if people are looking for like a step into the ultra trail running scene via multi-day, I think it's an awesome race. I did the live stream for it last year and got to be on the ground at various points. And that was what precipitated me signing up this year. And I was just sold. And so that's a good one. I would strongly encourage people to go check out that race if they're trail curious.
And from when we're talking right now, how long before the race begins? How far away are we?
We're about a month out, so it's May 6th, and I will tell you this: I have no idea how to train for 200-mile races. Joe McConaughey actually says training for a marathon, that's science. Training for an ultra marathon, pseudoscience. Training for 200+ mile races, voodoo magic. And so I think that this whole experience has just been voodoo magic, to use Joe's line. I've done a bunch of like local 50Ks, 50 milers. I'm doing 100K in 2 weeks called the Zion 100K down on Gooseberry Mesa outside the national park. And I don't know what I'm doing. I just figure if I have a bunch of long days out there and take it fairly easy and kind of survive those and just, blow the cobwebs off the concept of racing and take it easy and eat well, it's going to work. But check in with me, 2 weeks after the race and I'll let you know. Cause there's things we're starting to figure out about like, how and when to sleep, how and when to hydrate, what to eat, how to pace yourself. But talk about the counterculture. This is super early days. Like it's kind of like Cocodona in 2024 feels like Barkley in like 2010, and maybe in like 10 years, it's going to we're going to be talking like, is Cocodona going mainstream? But until then, it's still the wild, wild west.
Voodoo magic. I love it. I know a great friend of the podcast, Jeff Garmeyer, is currently training for the Cocodona as well. So
Yep. Awesome.
All right. Hey, Finn, you know where we are right now?
Where are we?
Hiking hacks.
That's right. It's time for your hiking hack. And this segment is sponsored by the outdoor clothing brand Magnet Designs, thru hiker owned and making quality ultralight craft outdoor gear by hand in Bend, Oregon. Designed on trail, built for trail life. Visit magnetdesigns.com with no E in designs. So, Finn, what trail wisdom do you have for our listeners to make their next outdoor adventure even better?
I would say embrace your inner voice. I think people totally underrate the conversations that you can have with yourself on the trail. I've talked with a lot of people, and maybe this is a privileged thing to say, but whatever it is that exists inside my head, I've always enjoyed the conversation. There have been some things that I've had to confront that are like not great, but like I've just seen it as like part of the journey. And if you can make friends with yourself and really get to know that voice and get beyond the stuff that makes you want to focus more on the external and less the internal, it's going to be an awesome, naturally psychedelic ride. Like I've gotten to make friends with my inner voice and it rocks. Like I am not worried about the time spent alone on trail. It's going to be amazing out there.
That's fantastic. All right. So there you have it. We're just about done here. Hope our listeners enjoyed our time with Finn. I want to thank you for joining us this week. And Finn, how can our listeners keep up with you on social media, and where can they find updates on your latest adventures, and where can they find Singletrack?
Yep. Singletrack podcast. If we're publishing on this on YouTube, just go find my ugly mug. That's the thumbnail thing on Apple and Spotify. The big head. Yeah. If you see a big head, you've found the right Singletrack. And there's like some mountain biking ones out there too. So we're the trail running one. And then on Instagram, we're at Run Singletrack. We have a website, runsingletrack.com, although we're kind of undergoing a rebranding and we're going to redo that soon, but the domain will probably stay the same. Yeah. And then, I'll throw my email out there, finn@singletrack.run. I respond to every single one. And, if you have any questions or, topics that you want to keep riffing on, I'm always down.
Okay. Remember to check out Hiker Trash Radio on social media as well. We're on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok. No TikTok account there, Finn?
No TikTok, but we got YouTube. I'm a huge, and I think that one of the most underrated marketing plays for podcasts in 2024 and beyond is to like really focus on YouTube. I think it's an amazing platform for capturing demand and discovery and just like building an audience. I think it's great. So we're big on YouTube in 2024.
Okay. And if you have comments or clips you want to share with me, you can send it to me at hikertrashradio@gmail.com.
Off the beaten path.
Now, unfortunately, Finn, we can't always be on the trail. And when we're not, we need to find a way to get our adventure fix. So I'm going to ask you to share some outdoor adventure media with our listeners to help them get by. This could be a book, a movie, documentary. We call this segment Off the Beaten Path. What do you have for us?
Oh, gosh. Recommendation. I'm going to go with a book, which is called Ecotopia by Ernest Callenbach, written back in the mid-'70s when sort of the environmental movement was taking shape. And it's sort of a utopian-based novel. The short summary of it is the scene. It was set 12 years after the entire west coast of the U.S. seceded from the United States. And there's this journalist from the New York Times who is one of the first Americans allowed to travel into the country to report back on conditions there. And so the chapters are alternating. One chapter will be his article back to the New York Times that gets published. The other chapter will be a journal of his experience there. And this country of Ecotopia has basically seceded in order to live out this like perfect environmental ideal of like, there's like no planes that are flying. Nobody has cars. The cities are very dense. It's very easy to get around and get what you need. There's all these social conventions that at the time people thought were like the most fulfilling for people to kind of embrace and follow. And it's really interesting. Like as the book progresses, I don't want to ruin it for people, but he kind of becomes increasingly enamored of that culture. And if I remember correctly, he ends up sort of like never returning to the US and staying there. So it's a good one. If you like sort of science fiction or utopian based stuff, it's interesting. And I think a lot of the premises held up well. So I would recommend that one.
All right. That's a great one. Ecotopia. And I can imagine your dad just slamming that down on the dinner table one night when you were 10 and said, "Hey, read this. Give me your feedback."
Totally. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
What have we not asked you?
And before we wrap things up today, just one more segment for you called What Have I Not Asked You That You're Dying to Tell Us About? What do we miss today?
I'm always spreading the gospel of Salt Lake City. I moved here 8 years ago. I think the lifestyle is amazing. I always say we don't have great nightlife, but we have great day life. Our access to trails is awesome. There's a community of people here that love hiking, climbing, skiing, running. I'm going to this gala 2 nights from now that is gonna have probably 300 to 400 avid hikers and trail runners in attendance. And that whole culture has really grown fast in the last like 5 to 6 years. Like I would say the community here is almost unrecognizable in a good way to what it was when I first got here. It was very like disconnected and you know, people kind of going at it on their own, but things are very coordinated now and there's a great network. Like I met my wife through it. Like and all my best friends I found in my late 20s and 30s, which is I think for a lot of people not common. So like Salt Lake City is where it's at. It's happening.
An outdoor adventure mecca. And I like the way you put that. There's not a lot of great nightlife, but a lot of great day life.
Day life. If you're a fan of the day life.
Nice. All right. Hey, we are finished. I want to thank you for coming on the podcast. We wish you the very best in your future adventures in the Cocodona. Hope you'll consider coming back at some point to share that experience as well as UTMB. As we close up today, any shout outs to friends and family?
Yeah. I mean, I really do believe you're a product of your environment, and that's why it's so important to make sure that you are intentional at the outset of anything to really analyze who's around you and who you want to be with, because that's who you're going to be, you know, days, months, years from now. And I would just say my friend group here, a couple guys in particular, Caleb Olson, Jacob Grant, Mike McMonigal, Leah Yingling, my wife, Julia, like they've made me who I am. And I'm really appreciative of it because this is who I wanted to be.
All right. Well, hey, listeners, thank you for tuning in. Always remember, the trail is the trail. It doesn't care if you want to go downhill. It doesn't care if it's almost dark and you're looking for a campsite. It doesn't even care if you spent the night in the front seat of a van and froze your ass off at Frozen Head State Park. The trail is the trail. Embrace the sock.